Hi mamas, and welcome back to Mommy's on a Call. How is it already the middle of April? I swear I just said, how is it already March just a couple weeks ago? But I realized, I apologize, there's been a 3-week gap since the last episode. Things kind of got a little crazy with kids' spring break. My kid had a 2-week spring break. Like, who has 2 weeks of spring break? And so I ended up taking that time to slow down, detach from social media, detach from work, and really focus on being present with my kids for those 2 weeks. I realized I was so excited for so many years for the day for my kids to start to go to school, but now I realize it's a rare chance when all 3 of them get to be home all together outside of the weekends. And so I took that time to really enjoy that time together as a family. We went on a family vacation to Mexico, which I'm not sure about you as a parent, but vacations aren't really vacations anymore when you have kids. They're more like trips. But anyway, it was a lot of fun. And then afterwards we came back, we went to Disneyland, we spent time at the pool because it was like 90 degrees here in Los Angeles, and we just had fun. But that also meant that I took a sudden break in the podcast. It wasn't intentional. I actually had batched episodes for every single week that I knew we would be on spring break. But I just didn't feel good about releasing something and not actually being there to promote it and be part of it. I know I have it all done and in the queue, but it just didn't feel aligned. And so I decided to take a break. But I'm back, and we are going to be releasing these episodes, and we are going to get going through until we hit summer vacation. So today is an episode that I'm really excited about. Gut health is something that I've been fascinated by, as I have suffered for many years from different gut issues. But it wasn't until recently that I actually started to understand the world of supplements and the science behind what all of these trends like prebiotics and probiotics were all about. I was the person who bought anything that said probiotic for me and the kids, like yogurt smoothies, gummies, cute packaged powders with images of superheroes on it. I assumed that if it said probiotic, it was a probiotic. But of course I was wrong. Over the last couple of years, through my coursework, research, and informative interviews like today's episode with Ara Katz, the co-founder of Seed Health, I realized just how much misinformation is out there and how important it is to understand the science behind what you're putting into your body. While we taped this episode a month or so ago, her company, Seed, just announced their second product called PDS-08, Pediatric Daily Symbiotic, just yesterday, which is the first and only clinically studied 9-strain probiotic and prebiotic combination developed specifically for kids and adolescents ages 3 through 17 years old. PDS-08 contains strains that promote gastrointestinal health, gut barrier integrity, gut immune function, dermatological health, and respiratory health in children and teens. I can't wait to have my kids try this. And for all you amazing Mommies on a Call listeners out there, Seed has generously offered 15% off your entire order if you use the code Mommies on a Call. So that's MOMMYSONCALL. So if you haven't tried the adult version of Seed called DS-01, then now's the time to try both the kid and adult version. Plus, you get 15% off. And just a side note, Seed is not sponsoring this podcast, and I am not an affiliate for their products, at least right now, as I'm recording this. I'm a huge advocate, though, for improving the future generations of health, and I'm just excited to be part of sharing their science-backed products. So now on to my conversation. Enjoy. Welcome to Mommy's on a Call, your sacred space to laugh, learn, and feel like a real grown-up human for a hot minute. I'm Stephanie Uchima Carney, a mom of 3 under 6, serial entrepreneur, business strategist, and donut connoisseur, just trying to get through the day one cold cup of coffee at a time. I believe that with more intention, a positive mindset, and self-care, it is possible to thrive in motherhood, business, and life. My mission is to uncover the daily rituals, life lessons, real-life tactics, and favorite tools to inspire and empower you, mommy, to get the most out of life every single unpredictable day. So grab your headphones, tell your kids you're on the potty, and tune in weekly for some laughs, knowledge bombs, and plenty of real talk with real moms, and maybe a dad or two. Welcome to the Mommy Pod. Welcome back to Mommies on a Call. Today, I'm excited to bring to you Ara Katz. She's a mother, an entrepreneur, author, and wellness expert. She's the co-founder of a microbial science company, Seed Health, and consumer innovations brand Seed. Ara's first pregnancy and breastfeeding experience led her to the microbiome and inspired her personal mission to explore the importance and impact of microbiomes. At Seed Health, she leads fundraising, design thinking, brand insights, commercialization, and the company's transitional work in science communication and storytelling. She lives in Venice, California with her husband and 6-year-old son, Pax, and is currently pregnant with her second child, due pretty much at any minute. So welcome.
Thank you. I am really excited to be here, and I love the name of your podcast. So.
It's a perfect thing. I mean, I started it during the pandemic when kids were running in, and I kept screaming, "Mommy's on a call," and it just stuck. Originally, the podcast was actually called Power Mom Minute because I wanted to interview successful moms in business like yourself, and it just it shifted. It was perfect. So I want to start off by asking, what is your biggest mom win of the week?
Oh, it was this morning. I dropped my dad off of there. My son got up at like 5:50 something, which is his normal wake up time. He got himself, I told him in the morning that he could come with me to drop off his grandfather at the airport. He was dressed by 6:06. We got out of the house, all of us, at like 6:30. He put his lunch in his like own little lunch carrier. He filled his water bottle for school, put it all by the door.
Oh my goodness.
And we walked out of the house at 6:30. We drove my dad to the airport. Then we went and picked up a little breakfast, and I got him to the early drop-off time at school. And I was like, this is amazing.
Wow. Is he normally like one of those kids who you have to say like, put on your shoes, or is he pretty good about being on time?
It depends on the level of resistance and testing that he is working through on that given day as a high conviction 6-year-old, which drives me a little insane sometimes, but also I remember that conviction is a very good thing. So yeah, it never goes that smoothly, I would say. And then my other win was that he loves science. And so he just keeps asking me about like dark matter, dark energy, atoms and particles, and like all these like interesting things. And then most relevant to ours, not that I know you only asked me for one, but I'll give you the third one, is that I found in his room these little pieces of paper where he was practicing writing microbiome.
Oh my goodness.
Which is the cutest thing. And I was like...
And is he in kindergarten or first grade?
He's in kindergarten. It was so cute. And I was like, oh my God, I've really gotten through.
Wow. Well, and I was going to ask, because you don't necessarily have like a science background. You were not a scientist or like an expert in any of this. You came from a very different background. And so I wanted to get into kind of like how that happened. But before we get started, give a little context to the audience. Ages of your children. I know you're pregnant and you have a 6-year-old, so I guess that's a given. But what are kind of the roles that you and your partner play in the family, in kind of the everyday life?
I mean, we really share, we both run startups, and, and I also, I don't think you can really talk about a household without, and actually I wrote a post for International Women's Day that due to mommy being on too many calls, I never posted, which is kind of the story of my social media these days. But look, I think I love answering this, but I just will also say that I think it's really hard to talk about these things without being incredibly honest about the childcare that you have, because the truth is like that's a lot of the invisible work that happens that makes a lot of our homes actually work and often goes like way unrecognized. And it's often like I can talk about me and my partner, but the truth is like that's not what's on Instagram, and that it's like the childcare piece is a really big one. So I would say the three of us because I think it's important to recognize that between myself and my partner, we both run startups. We're both like in it day to day, like operationally. And so we really, to be honest, we split a lot of, it ebbs and flows. We split a lot of stuff. He, and particularly like a lot of like the extra, like he has his like one extracurricular activity and he's like, I signed up for baseball. I'm like, yeah, let me just tell you the 20 other things plus starting to plan the summer, plus like all these other things that like go on. So I let him be very proud of those little wins. But, really like he truthfully like around like getting groceries and just making sure we have food in the house or like what we're doing for dinner that day. Like, I have a very demanding work schedule right now. And so I think, and also just being pregnant, he really between that, and I think between the pandemic and him being very safe and very protective, I think actually took on a lot of the household stuff that probably we would have split a little bit more. And also he works from, I have an office close by to my house that I can kind of work from, and he primarily works from home. So I think it's been easier for him to do that despite the never ending delivery and Amazon doorbell rings. And then for things like, big decisions like school, where we're gonna, not that this was that relevant this past 3 years, but like, where are we gonna go? How are we gonna spend our time? Like, we write a weekly schedule, and that's also for our nanny too. And it's a lot of just dividing and conquering, to be honest. The things that I own more are like all the medical and health, science, nutrition related things. And he gets to own like safety. So he has like the car seat guy on like speed dial, whereas like I'm the one that's a little bit more like overseeing like the pediatric, like the vaccine schedule.
So now, are you prepared though for number 2? So in my opinion, and I'm not saying this, and everyone has a very different opinion, I thought going from 1 to 2 was exponentially harder than 0 to 1.
Yes.
And my reasoning was like 0 to 1, it was obviously hard, but you don't know any better. But from 1 to 2, it was that you could never pass off a child. You could never say like, oh, I'm going to take a shower while you watch the 1. You have 2.
Yes.
And divide and conquer comes with a whole different meaning.
Yes.
How have you started to think about that, especially moving forward? You're birthing a new product in your company. You're birthing a baby at the same time. You're running this company. He has a startup. Have you thought about 2, and what's that going to look like? And your maternity leave too. Are you going to take one?
Well, whatever that will look like at this moment. Although I think COVID really changed, just working backwards from what you said. I mean, I think COVID really changed a lot of the ways that I feel particularly women who have children can work. So you can get on a Zoom call and be camera off and breastfeed if you want. You can, I think it created like a lot of agility in the way that you think about work and showing up for work and being able to manage. And I think a lot of people really also changed like how they think about their homes as a place to like do both and have both and find that balance outside of when you have to say mommy's on a call.
Yeah.
On a call. And so the truth is I mean, I have contemplated it a little bit. We feel like we're so busy that I think in some ways we haven't really like been like, oh wait, this is real yet, because we're so busy. And in some ways I think that almost like allows for like less suffering and anticipation of any of the issues. But it's like anything else. It's like you figure it out and you go through it, and you can choose if you want to suffer through it, or you can choose if you're going to be like, we're problem solvers really. And I think both, but we have help that we are privileged to afford, which of course is what allows us to do a lot of the things that we want to do, like work-wise. And then on top of that, we know that it will be a lot, and that we'll figure, you figure it out. I mean, when you have like an operational mindset and you can grow a company, and I think at this point, after running a company through a global pandemic and all of the challenges that have presented themselves in the last couple of years, I think put a lot of things in perspective as to whether or not something is actually like a really big problem, or if it's just like a new set of logistics that needs to be worked through, i.e. like the upending of everyone's global supply chain.
Exactly.
So
you have bigger problems.
I will not be the very first person to have 2 children. And also the age difference, it's different than having like 2 under 2 or like 2 under 4. Like, I have a 6-year-old that takes a shower by himself, and he if you're getting on a plane, like he just puts his headphone, he kind of settles himself in. And I think that that would feel very different if I was chasing someone else that was like pre-verbal and like totally ineffective at caring for themselves.
Like, hi, I had a newborn, a 19-month-old,
Yes.
and a 4.5-year-old. So it was a little rough.
I couldn't even imagine it.
I was going to say the 6-year-old will be very helpful. And you mentioned they were both boys, so that's exciting. So at least it's not a whole new learning curve. But I want to back it up 6 years. So you technically were not like this scientist that always talks about, all the microbiome and all the things that you do, and you have a kid and you decide to start a new company in a field that you weren't an expert in. Kind of walk me through that, because number one, starting a new company alone in something that isn't your, I've been in this forever, is something a big deal. And then having a baby, how did that all come about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not obviously a formally trained scientist by any stretch. I'm a very good science communicator and translator. I'm well beyond my 10,000 hours. And I was, however, prior to Seed, the friend that a lot of people texted to ask about things, only because I was just honestly pretty good at doing research and like learning quickly and finding my way to the right person who I felt had the best answers, and who I felt operated with like less bias and would be the most truth, what I felt was the most truthful. So, and that started back in high school. I've been like reading scientific papers and been like in and around. Started off like actually with interest in oncology and cancer and nutrition actually, because my mom got pancreatic cancer when she was 49 years old, or 48 years old rather. She passed away at 49. And so, that was my real first moment of like understanding like how clinical trials work, how scientific papers work. Cause so many of the clinical trials that oncology patients are, you have to understand what they're trying to evaluate, and at that point you have like little time to make very big decisions. And so I think that really set off a whole lifelong love for me of getting answers and really trying to understand where bias comes from, in terms of how we make choices for our health and our bodies, and just became like really fascinated with everything related to both, not just pathology, but just like really just prevention, just care for our bodies, and also the behaviors and the way we make choices. And that ended up centering a lot around like food and nutrition. And then I kind of knew at some point in my life I would end up in health, and something scientific. I've always been like more like tech, like more forward tech. So, whether it was like mobile commerce or or just like mobile development, or at the Media Lab at MIT, I worked on like as a visiting fellow, like all kinds of crazy technology, and thinking about the storytelling of it, as well as, its future applications in our lives. And so I think I've always kind of been at like the beginning of a lot of things. Like I helped launch Apple Pay with Apple. I was we were one of the first 14 partners, at my previous company that I co-founded. So like really kind of like early stuff has always been the thing that like drove me. And I never worked at a big company or had like a big kind of corporate job. And so I'm an entrepreneur like through and through. And so I had a miscarriage actually, and very promptly resigned from my previous the company that I co-founded, the mobile commerce company I co-founded.
And was that before you had PAX?
That was before I had PAX. Wow. And it was just like a big wake up call of like, what do I want to do with my, biologically, I think miscarriages are miracles. Truly, the fact that your own body understands that a life is not viable is truly, I understand the attachment and the sadness and the mourning that comes from what could have been. But at the same time, it's truly a miracle that our bodies understand what to do. And so it wasn't so much like the grieving of like, of the first baby, as much as it was kind of just a grieving of like, how did I get this far? And like, why am I using my life to create this when I could be creating this now that I know how to do all these things and build companies and raise capital and build brands? And it just was a real like eye opener. And so I think it re-instilled and reinvigorated my love of biology and of human health. It brought me closer, certainly, into my body, especially in the moment of miscarriage. Yeah. And I very quickly got pregnant right after that. And I met my co-founder when I was pregnant, and I had already kind of started looking at like microbiome, and it was getting rumblings in different circles for different reasons, both in scientific and non-scientific areas. And I was very curious. And I met him, and he was just like extraordinary thinker about where that science was headed. He'd been tracking the field since 2006.
Wow.
I think we absolutely bonded over early childhood development, and like originally over like things like N3 fatty acids and omega-3s, and just importance in pregnancy and early child development. And then that kind of led to, okay, there are these early windows in development where you can make like such a huge impact in a child's life. And that kind of ended up like crisscrossing with like our microbiome world. And of course our name Seed comes from seeding, which is the biological process by which an infant first has exposure to microbes.
Which I do want to ask you a little bit about, because I'm so curious on that. I unfortunately had 3 C-sections, and I am the product of a C-section, and I have the worst immune system on the planet. My husband says that I am like such a finely tuned instrument. Like, I lived in a bubble. I swear to God, my dad was sponsored by Lysol. When the pandemic hit, it was like his Olympics. I like was exposed to like no germs. I was a C-section baby, and I have the worst allergies, gut issues, hormone issues, you name it, I have it. And so I'm curious, like the amount of antibiotics I've taken in my youth and even adulthood, like it has been terrible. And so now I'm researching more about this. And so I'm curious, like, did I screw up my children by having C-sections? And, explain a little bit about, the seedling.
Totally. It's not that black and white. It's not that black and white. I think a lot of the research is so I think there's a few things. There's a lot of things that happen prenatally that the maternal microbiome and the infant's microbiome and the development of it is impacted by. And that's everything from the mother's diet, whether or not she takes antibiotics during pregnancy, other medications, there's a lot that happens prenatally that they used to think that the womb was just sterile. And therefore the microbiome really didn't like quote unquote start until birth. That is being, I think, fairly well debunked at this point, but also still a subject of scientific maybe controversy, just because it's unclear whether it's microbes versus the metabolites that come from microbes, like what they're creating, that is being transferred in the amniotic fluid. But nonetheless, we do know that things like the mother's nutrition and diet shape and begin to shape important factors that impact the growth and development of the microbiome, as well as areas that the microbiome, like metabolism, things like that, also impact.
So I pretty much screwed up my 3 children from the beginning.
No. So what I'm going to say is that, and then you get into, so there's like kind of the prenatal period, and there's lots of really interesting research, both that has been done as well as it's being done right now to understand how that prenatal period impacts the development of the child's microbiome, immune system, GI system, etc. Then there's birth, mode of birth. And of course, there's kind of 2 ways, theoretically. Obviously, vaginal birth. The interesting thing about a vaginal birth is that they're exposed to vaginal microbes, fecal microbes, because of proximity to both fecal matter and like the anus at birth, which is
literally next to the head there, down there.
And a lot of people think that there's an evolutionary reason for that, actually. That why they evolved, so those 2 holes evolved so closely together. And then skin microbes. Those are kind of the first 3. And then of course, right after that, it's like environment, and then other skin, if your partner if there's another adult that's holding it, and then of course everything, whether it's in a hospital, your home, all of a sudden there's information called microbes that are coming in and around you. Obviously, yours might have had some more aerosolized Lysol molecules. Then you get into, and of course, then there's C-section babies who their very, very, very early microbiome resembles more the skin microbiome of the mother, because of course that is really the majority of their first exposure.
Yeah, like I put my children immediately on me, even though they were C-section. I was like, don't wipe them off, put them on me. But it's not like I was going to rub like vaginal material. Yeah, I couldn't move.
A lot of people are doing that. It's called vaginal swabbing. It's a Dr. Maria Dominguez-Bello at Rutgers, who's previously at NYU, is one of our advisors, is leading the charge of that research. The FDA has not liked it so far. It's called vaginal swabbing, because they believe there's too high a risk of infection, which I'm like, whenever I hear that, I'm like, yeah, but it would have come out, if it came out that way, you wouldn't have known if there was an infection either. So anyway.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, it hasn't been well received regulatory wise yet as like a formal thing. But of course, a lot of people, I know midwives, I know other people who have other births, or they just honestly just do it themselves. However, the good news, I think, or I should say the less like kind of self-shaming news that a lot of, I think, women who had C-sections kind of feel, is that then you go on to, okay, well, now what's nurturing, what's cultivating this microbiome? So breast milk is an extraordinary nutrient source and fertilizer for this kind of rainforest that is seeded at before and during birth, that needs to grow into a thriving kind of diverse ecosystem to be able to perform all of the functions that you were mentioning earlier, like digestion, maintaining your immune system, all these areas. So what they see and have seen, which is interesting, is that no matter what mode of birth, when in the presence of breastfeeding and in the absence of antibiotics in the first, 12 to 18 months of life, you start to see the microbiomes converge and look very similar, actually. That's really interesting because it doesn't mean that, you can just have a C-section and then breastfeeding just immediately changes everything. But they really have seen that assuming fairly natural or healthy conditions for a child, that in the presence of breastfeeding, the mode of birth tends to make less of a difference. So then you come into the question of, okay, but I breastfed for a second, went right to formula, and the kid had antibiotics in the first 18 months, right? And that is where you start to see these perturbations to that early development that can have lifelong impact. And that's probably up until even 5-6 years old. There's a question. It's unclear when the microbiome entirely reaches what they call steady state, which kind of means it's a little bit like your blueprint for life. Of course, things change. Your microbiome is changing all the time, but it has a fairly clear signature by that point.
Which I'm actually curious because we lived the last 2 years and, trying to be a germ-free bubble. I had a C-section baby in 2020. I luckily breastfed, but unfortunately I had to go to emergency surgery. And so I had to stop after 10 months. But she also never got sick for the first 14 months, which is why this week she had 105 fever. And they said she just had a virus, a common cold. And so I'm curious, that disruption, but also say you did do all those things where you gave antibiotics and stuff, any disruption in the microbiome, is it possible to reverse, or is there anything we can do as moms to change that now after the fact?
I think, look, the primary lever, first of all, you breastfed for 10 months, which is longer than a lot of mothers do. I think there's other factors, right? Germ-free, COVID-free is different than germ-free, right? Being in nature is not that. There's a lot of there's a lot of microbes there, but you don't need to kill them.
I always say my mom has the best immunity because she grew up in the Philippines and played with pigs. And
yes,
I'm it's because you got all of that versus not being around anything.
Yes, it's why you see almost an entire lack of things like allergies in the Amish population, as an example. The way that they use surfactants like cleansers, the way they maintain their built environment, and then the proximity to the land, the crops, the way that they work, the way they structure their time, it's incredibly clear that the exposure to endotoxins, the exposure to all of those microbes, the exposure to allergens absolutely trains the immune system in a way that you just don't see you just don't see these autoimmune responses or allergic responses in certain populations. And because of that, but to give us your answer about what you can do, look, it's not a doomsday. The microbiome, the fascinating thing about the microbiome versus areas like genomics, I always make the joke that we sequence the human genome, but I can't go to Whole Foods and do anything about it. It's a great achievement.
But I'm curious, can you even test the microbiome? How do you test it to be oh, yours is healthy?
Well, Obama initiated the largest NIH initiative, actually, I think in history, almost $200 million, called the Human Microbiome Project, to answer the question of what is a healthy microbiome. And the answer is, there is no one healthy microbiome. The answer is that there are certain markers that make it healthy. One is diversity I'm talking about the gut microbiome, because it's important. Diversity. You would not want diversity of your vaginal microbiome, as an example. That's an ecosystem that you want to be just dominated by. Actually, most specifically one. Or
else you'll get candida and yeast infections and all sorts of crazy things, which I've encountered also.
Yes, yeah,
so this is why this is fascinating to me. I'm trying to cure myself, so I'm gaining all the insight I can.
But the more, so what I was saying is the joke about genomics is you can't really go to the grocery store and be well, I'm just going to buy this for my genome. But the microbiome is a fascinating field, and probably one of the reasons it's so well understood by, or I should say understood, but certainly the widespread gut mania has kind of happened, is because we start to understand how it's deeply connected to so many parts of our body, our pathology, health, the way that our bodies function, and obviously is so correlated with quality of life and other areas that really can be incredibly disruptive in, things like obviously IBS and autoimmune conditions, asthma, allergy, and just simply feeling bloated after you after you eat food. GI and digestive systems, digestive issues are such a massive quality of life impact to so many people. even if they don't even have diagnosed IBS or IBD or Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. So the answer to your question of like, the cool thing about microbiome is like, so much of the research that has come out actually is like quite actionable in your life. So look, the biggest lever when you're asking me about the kids, the biggest lever is nutrition and diet. And that is I can't emphasize that enough. Obviously, as somebody who, runs a company that we develop, innovations in probiotics. And of course, like I can talk for a long time about why certain strains can be really impactful to human health. But at the end of the day, there's really lifestyle choices like diet and nutrition, reduction of stress, sleep, hydration. I mean, these things that are, everyone dresses up in all kinds of different marketing terms, but at the end of the day, like those, the not reducing the non-discriminate use of antibiotics, being mindful from a hygiene perspective of like the oral microbiome, the way you clean your home, your sheets, your kids' clothes, all of these things are just microbial exposure of things that can either nurture or perturb or hurt the microbiome, or things that impact the microbiome, like skin barriers.
Right. So you've learned, I mean, a ton, obviously, building the company and about the microbiome, throughout the last, since you had PAX. Are you personally doing anything different in this pregnancy than you did, say, in the last one because of all of this, knowledge that you now know, or things that you've seen, trends that have changed? Like, what are you doing personally in this pregnancy differently?
Oh, like a lot of interesting things. I mean, I think, it's interesting that a lot of microbiome research on nutrition really reveals, I think, the importance of a plant-based diet, like really reveals the absolute kind of necessity for fiber, for the phytonutrients and the polyphenols that are present in so many of foods, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, that are critical for a thriving microbiome. And of course, what they need to create and their what they make from those compounds that are really critical and important for your body. I would say I am currently a guinea pig for one of our products, which is much further out, but definitely really fascinating in terms of understanding like perilactational approaches for supplementation, to think about like how you could adjust or change the profile of breast milk, and what you could also then supplement into either breast milk or formula as a continuation of what starts in me and goes into an infant. So that's something that we're working on.
Do you know, I interviewed actually on the podcast Dr. Stephanie. She owns the lactation lab. And it's really interesting because she did an analysis of my breast milk, because I was curious as I had certain deficiencies, and I was curious if it would be passed down to my children when I was breastfeeding, because I was very low in vitamin B and D. And it was just like, I was trying to like help myself, but then also like, how would that affect my children? So that was something that was interesting. That's really cool.
Well, and interestingly enough too, your breast milk profile changes over time.
Yeah, because it adjusts to the needs of the child, and it like knows what it needs. It's so smart.
Yeah, it's crazy. So so there's definitely some like guinea pigging going on during this pregnancy as well as swabbing and testing my vaginal microbiome, which is really interesting because of course the profile of your vaginal microbiome impacts everything from like preterm birth to fertility, to like maintaining an acidic environment, to a lot of things, but obviously really interesting to start thinking about that as a biomarker for reproductive health, which I think it will be in the future.
In all the studies, have you seen a lot of change? Like once you have a baby, like moms compared to just women who haven't had children, are there significant differences? Because I'm curious, because my hormones changed dramatically and my gut health after having my third kid. And it could be age, because I'm a lot older than I was before, but it was interesting. And so I was curious about that. Like, how does that change? Is there, and like, as a mom now, what can we do for ourselves besides maybe just changing our nutrition to kind of correct all of these disruptions that have happened in our body?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I have to look into the women who have birth versus not, because the problem is like time continues. And obviously, as you move towards menopause, your vaginal microbiome changes. So, and obviously that's why there's very specific like stage dependent issues. I think my understanding is that your microbiome does go fairly after birth back to, well, depending on what's happening health, back to a baseline that looks like your community state type. There's 4 community state types of vaginal what they call CS1, 2, 3, 4 of different vaginal microbiomes that can vary across like ethnicities and geographies, actually, which is really interesting. But nonetheless, I mean, obviously, and I can imagine, but I would have to like do a little bit more research. But so much of like having an acidic environment in your vagina, which is what the lactobacilli are responsible for, is important for like shuttling sperm and making sure that you can procreate. So of course, at certain ages, that's going to adjust because your body knows that you're no longer, viable to do, to do that. And so, which, women are pushing more and more now up into the much later ages. And so it really, I think interesting thing about the vaginal microbiome is that it really experiences the most perturbation and the most disruption after menstruation. The moments after menstruation, which is when you're most susceptible to like STIs and infection, and after sex. And that can be oral sex too. It's not just sex, like not just heterosexual or like,
right.
right. Regular. I was going to say regular. Yeah. But penetration. I mean, penetration versus like oral, I would say, no matter what is penetrating, by the way, but particularly when it's something that's alive, it has its own genital microbiome. And that can be very perturbing to the vaginal microbiome, but really any kind of sex can be, and they see that with oral sex too, because of course there's all kinds of pathogens and different microbes that are in your mouth that also can disrupt the microbiome. And then after menstruation, there's a tremendous amount of disruption. It almost really leaves it very susceptible, but in both those cases too, which is why it creates the perfect environment for pathogens.
Interesting. Well, since you're so like deep into, biohacking yourself and all of this and really understanding, I'm curious, on a day-to-day basis, do you have any wellness practices? Do you have anything that you do for yourself kind of daily that is also not just for your physical health, but like, what do you do for yourself daily? Do you have any rituals?
Well, I love what I do every day. So I work, and I wish that wasn't tied as much to like not taking care of yourself, but I think
it is. It's occupational wellness. That's very important.
Yeah, I think the fact that like I wake up every day with like a skip in my step, and even on the hardest days, like I so love and feel committed to what I do that I feel there's a tremendous amount of fulfillment. And I actually I'm not as susceptible to the notion of like the work-life split. And I don't mean that because I have like really poor boundaries and I just like work myself to death. But I mean it in the sense that I think sometimes the most fulfilled life and the most meaningful comes from alignment and the sense of continuity and actually not feeling split, which is actually very well amplified in that new show on Apple TV called Severance, which is extraordinary, which actually splits you from a mental perspective. And so I would start with, people, I think you just want to, most people want to know if I drink, what kind of matcha I drink in the morning.
No. I'm curious, what your thing is.
The truth is that I think the greatest privilege and self-care is that I get to work with the people that I get to work with all day. If you look at the hours I spend doing what I do and building Seed versus the hours I spend doing all the other wellness things I can tell you about, I think if this wasn't in alignment, those things would be much less impactful than they are. They're good supplements, I think. So I think I feel very grateful for, I guess, like what you said, my occupational wellness, but also the alignment, the continuity to my life and how meaningful that feels to me. I would say probably after that is just being in nature. We spend a lot of time as a family, and particularly with my son, like, on the weekends, if we're going to do anything, it's like usually a hike, it's usually outside. And LA is, of course, a beautiful place to have that all year round. And then I think, look, I at this very moment, of course, because I'm pregnant and trimester by trimester, it's like shifted a little bit. At this very moment, I am training myself in hypno babies and hypnobirths. So
I did that. Yeah. I so desperately wanted to do that with my first, and he was breached, and I had to have a C-section. His butt was in my birth canal, so it wasn't going to happen.
Wasn't possible. Yeah. Well, still have the process of birth is birth.
Yeah.
So and so I think I've been spending a lot of time like understanding self-hypnosis and what that feels like to go through an experience like birth that way. But I would say if I was going to extract that out to just my whole life, there's usually something that on the side I'm like trying to learn about or immerse myself in.
What's that new thing for you right now?
That is the hypno. I mean,
Okay.
that's the hypno birth. And then I would say, and then obviously the right now is also the guinea pigging. I mentioned that it's kind of interesting. But then I train 4 mornings a week, which is more like cross training. And I really care about exercise and about what, not just for my body, but, neurologically and cognitively. And I think I'm a better thinker. I think I do better work. I think I'm a better parent because of that. And that's really important to me. It's really boring, but I drink a lot of water.
Well, it's really good for you.
It's one of those, I always say, like, there's like, it's human behavior so funny. If you like put an acronym on all of this and you called it something and then you sold it, it would be like really exciting to people. But if you just say like, hey, I exercise and drink water, it's like, good for you.
And eat well, nutrition, water, I sleep. On that note, do you prioritize sleep? Like, you seem to wake up early. So.
I do. I wake up very, very early. I have my whole life, but I do prioritize sleep, despite the fact that during COVID, I definitely can't say that it wasn't disrupted a lot. I think the biggest thing is just diet. I really do.
Are you plant-based then?
I eat, I'm a pescatarian.
Okay.
So I eat, I shouldn't say, I'm mostly plant-based, and then I have a little bit of like sardines and a little bit of salmon.
Okay. Well, on that note, to wrap things up, I wanted to ask, what do you think is your superpower that you gained once you became a mom that made you better at business or life?
I think it really, like, becoming a parent really re-inspired and like totally rekindled my love of like learning and discovering in a way that I feel has absolutely transferred to my child, but also has enriched my experience of the world too.
Oh, I love that. And where can we find you online? You personally, company, all of that.
Oh, I'm just Ara Katz on Instagram. For Seed, we're seed.com. We're at Seed on Instagram. And if people want to really be nerdy and look at all the research we do in different areas, they can go to seedhealth.com too.
Well, thank you so much for joining today. Congrats on your second little one on the way, and good luck for the rest of your pregnancy.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Mommy's on a Call. Your support means the absolute world to me. You can find the show notes for this episode and other goodies over at mommysonacall.com. And if you enjoyed this episode or have gotten value from the podcast, I would be so grateful if you could head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review so that we can reach and empower more moms all over the world together. Thank you so much again, Mommy Pod, and I will see you here next time.